They would have never recognized how toxic and broken they were if you had not left them without asking them to leave. You stayed for a longer period of time than you should have, continually adjusting to their disarray, treading on eggshells, and making excuses for their behavior. Nevertheless, when you eventually made the decision to go your own way and walked away, you forced them to confront a reality that they had been trying to avoid for their entire lives. As soon as you quit being their emotional support system, the cozy illusion that they had been living in was destroyed immediately. They are now compelled to address their dysfunction without someone to blame or manipulate them while they are doing so. Your absence turned into a mirror by which they were unable to escape, reflecting back years of destructive habits that they are no longer able to deny. They were so full of faith in you, so certain that you would never abandon them. By this point, you had forgiven them an excessive number of times, endured an excessive number of empty apologies, and desensitized yourself to an excessive number of disappointments. They were made to feel untouchable, invincible, and impervious to the consequences of their actions. In other words, when you ultimately parted ways with them, they initially did not believe you. They laughed it off, claiming it was only a phase and that you were being dramatic, overreacting, and trying to make a point. As a result of their belief that you would never be finished, they laughed at the concept of you currently being finished. After that, the waiting began. The hours turned into days, and the days turned into weeks. There was no phone call, no text message, and no familiar footsteps back at the location where they had always expected you would be. The house had a strange feel to it, and the air itself seemed heavier. This was not because you had left something behind. Rather, it was because you had taken everything with you: your presence, your patience, and your light. Before it was no longer present, they failed to recognize the way in which your energy held everything together. Hey Chosen One, our Wisdom Peak channel for powerful insights, spiritual awakening, and divine wisdom is available in the description. Subscribe now and ascend with us. In the beginning, they made an effort to disregard it. They filled the space with distractions, they drowned the stillness in noise, and they did anything else they could think of to avoid accepting the absence that was staring at them like a phantom limb. They swore they could hear you in the next room, a ghost that wasn't there, an echo of something they never dreamed they'd lose. However, the walls whispered your name. They claimed they could hear you. They waited for the door to open, waiting for the warmth of your presence to return and fill the gap that they refused to acknowledge existed until the door opened. They sat in the spots that you had previously filled. However, you never did, and the awful reality started to set in slowly and painfully. You were gone. Not for a night, not for a few weeks, not until they apologized in the appropriate manner. Without a doubt, the silence grew intolerable. Not only did it bring to their attention the fact that you were not present, but it also compelled them to engage in introspection, and the results made them unhappy. The reason for this is that without you, they were left alone with the one and only person they had been attempting to avoid all along, themselves. You made things simple for them, even too simple. You were familiar with the rhythms of their dysfunction, like a song that you never intended to memorize, the way in which their voice became more agitated before an outburst, the way in which their stillness signaled danger rather than serenity, the way in which their attachment was contingent upon certain conditions, their love was governed by certain laws, and their approval had to be won. As a result, you made adjustments. You lowered the volume of your speeches, measured your responses, and reshaped yourself into a version that would not provoke them. You avoided their feelings, absorbed their fury, and swallowed their lameness. You did all of these things. You gained the ability to quiet storms that you did not actually cause. No one ever noticed. To them, it was a matter of equilibrium. To you, it was a matter of survival, and they referred to it as love. You were the glue that held something together that was already broken beyond repair. You were their stabilizer, their emotional shock absorber, and all of these things combined. Considering that you never allowed things to fall apart, they believed that the way they treated you was perfectly normal. After that, you went, and all of a sudden, the break in their universe was no longer going to be disguised. There was no one who could calm their rage, no one who could decipher their silence, and no one who could prevent their disorder from escalating past the point where it could be controlled. They were left to fend for themselves, and they were at a loss for what to do. They were suffocating in ways that they had never experienced before because the weight of their own dysfunction was pressing down on them. Rather than the fact that the toxicity was fresh, the problem was that you were no longer present to take it in. They were under the impression that they were in charge. They believed that they possessed power. Yet it was never power. It was simply you who was giving up your tranquility continuously and ceaselessly in order to prevent their world from collapsing. And without you, they were forced to confront the truth about who they really were. They were not powerful. They were not in charge. They were not misunderstood. They were just broken. And without someone to blame, without someone to keep everything together, they were finally forced to face the reality. It was never you. It was always them. They were finally forced to confront the truth at last. You put up with too many disagreements, smoothed over too many apologies, and accepted too many wounds that were not healed. You stayed in this relationship for too long. If you only tried harder, gave more, and understood deeper, they would change. They would see your worth. They would know how much you had sacrificed to have them in your life. You persuaded yourself that you could manage it, and that if you just pushed harder, gave more, and understood deeper, they would change. But that never happened because they were never required to do so. You endured every insult. You carried every load they imposed on you without complaining, and they mistook your endurance for weakness. You absorbed every disappointment. You swallowed every insult, and each and every one of these things. The assumption was made that you would remain until you decided to leave. And at that moment, things began to change. They believed that it was simply another argument, another misunderstanding, or another night in which you would weep yourself to sleep, but then wake up and carry on as if nothing had occurred. Those people were mistaken because this time something within you broke. Perhaps it was the manner in which they addressed you, speaking to you as if you were expendable. Perhaps it was the manner in which they disregarded your suffering, as if it were of no consequence. Perhaps it was just the burden of 1,000 betrayals that eventually broke your back. You have reached the point where there is no turning back, and for the very first time, you have made the decision to choose yourself. Hey, Chosen One, our Wisdom Peak channel for powerful insights, spiritual awakening, and divine wisdom is available in the description. Subscribe now and ascend with us. They experienced it the instant it took place. The moment your silence was not a sign of patience, but rather of detachment. The moment your absence was not a threat, but rather a decision. The moment you looked at them, not with wrath, not with love, but with a sense of finality. In addition, they were experiencing a state of terror because they were not only losing you, but they were also losing control over you. You had served as their safety net, their punching bag, and their promised opportunity for a second chance. They were taught to feel invincible, untouchable, and impervious to the consequences of their actions. Therefore, when you finally left, it was not just unexpected, it was horrifying. This is because it was the first time that they had to confront a truth that they had never wanted to confront. You were never weak. You were just done. It was their belief that you could be replaced. They assured themselves that they would find someone else, someone who would handle them more easily, someone who would not challenge them, and someone who would not require honesty, accountability, or growth. A fresh face, a new body, and a new distraction were all things that they quickly moved on to. On the other hand, it was not the same since, regardless of how hard they tried or how many nights they spent drowning in the presence of another person, there was something that was missing. You. Someone who would not call them out on their falsehoods, someone who would not challenge them to be better, and someone who would accept their disarray without forcing them to confront it was what they were looking for. The same arguments, the same excuses, and the same dysfunctional patterns were present in each and every new relationship, and they all eventually broke down. It followed them like a shadow, seeping into every new connection and stifling every endeavor with which they attempted to create anything real. This is due to the fact that it was never about you being excessive. Rather, it was about them being unable to provide you with what you deserved. They used to point the finger at you. Previously, they were able to persuade themselves that the issues that were occurring in the relationship were due to your actions, that if you had simply been more understanding, less emotional, and less demanding, then everything would have been okay. They were forced to confront the reality that it was never you, but it was always them. As they saw every new person slip through their fingers, as they felt every superficial connection disintegrate in the same manner, they were forced to face the truth. And that hole, which they believed they could fill with distractions, with attention, and with new partners who didn't see through their mask, just expanded further, because no one else possessed the patience that you did, no one else battled for them the way that you did, and no one else endured their chaos the way that you did. In addition, they came to the realization that they had lost something that they had never been willing to acknowledge. They had not lost a relationship. Rather, they had lost the one and only person who had ever genuinely seen them, and they can never get it back. They invested a significant amount of time and effort into persuading themselves that the issue was you, that you were excessively sensitive, excessively demanding, and excessively demanding, that you anticipated things that no one else would anticipate, and that you left because you could never be content. To the point where the mirror broke, they had told themselves this story so many times that they believed it. A friend who finally got tired of sugarcoating the truth. A partner who left them for the exact same reasons you did. A fight they had with someone new in which they heard their own words thrown back at them like a slap to the face, were all examples of something that was unforgiving, relentless, and unavoidable. It was not just one moment. It was a series of them. There was no longer any purpose for excuses. A number of holes were present in the narrative that they told themselves, including the same patterns, the same consequences, and the same pain. They were unable to break free of it. The common denominator was comprised of them. Every relationship fell apart as a result of the strain that was caused by their own dysfunction. In every instance, they were the ones who set fire to a bridge. Every instance of betrayal that they endured was simply someone turning a blind eye to something that they refused to alter. They desired to believe that you left because you were inadequate. They desired to believe that you were the source of the issue. On the other hand, the proof was abundant. Every time they looked in the mirror, they saw you. They saw you in the way that you used to look at them, pleading with them to change, to do better, to be better. The way that you used to fight for them, believe in them, and hold space for them. However, they had wasted it. The reason for this is because it was never about you not being sufficient. Rather, it was about them never being willing to develop. And when that understanding finally dawned on me, it did not bring me a sense of closure or serenity. Rather, it just brought about regret. The regret that gnawed at their hearts, the regret that continued to keep them awake at night, and the regret that murmured in the void that you had left behind, because that was the first time that they were unable to get away from it. Every single delusion that they had ever had about themselves had been shattered into pieces, just like the mirror. They had no idea that they would be alone. Not in this manner, not in a manner that would make the quiet excruciating, and not in a manner that would transform their own thinking into an adversary from which they would be unable to escape. You were always there for them. You were the one who softened the rough edges of their personalities, who soaked up their emotions like a sponge, and who turned their vicious behavior into something that you could take responsibility for. But you were gone, and without you, they had no choice but to confront themselves. There were no more distractions, no more scapegoats, and no more illusions. It was just them and the truth that they had spent their entire lives trying to avoid. They were the source of the issue. First, they put up a fight against it, that you were too much for them, that you abandoned them, and that you never truly loved them, were all falsehoods that they told themselves constantly. They continued to rely on the same justifications and narratives that had always served to shield them from the necessity of introspection to begin with. However, the statements were rendered meaningless due to the fact that this time there was no one left to believe them. By this point, they were able to recognize the patterns, the cycles, and the destruction that they had left behind. It wasn't just that they were losing people. They were gradually driving them away. These two were not only unfortunate in love, but they were also unable to keep their relationship going. They were crushed under the weight of it, on account of the fact that it was never intended to be in this state. They believed that they could keep you forever, that you would always be there for them, that you would endure them, that you would love them, and that you would make them feel as though they were not as broken as they actually were. If you had remained, they would not have been able to arrive at this point. They would not have been able to recognize themselves for what they truly were: poisonous, damaged, and the driving force behind their own agony. They were unable to reverse it. They were unable to unsee what they were forced to confront as a result of your absence. They were only able to sit with it by themselves. They believed that they were unbreakable. They wore their ego like armor, confident that nothing could break them, including heartache, betrayal, and loss. They believed anything could shatter them. On the other hand, you were not merely a loss. Rather, you were the crack in their foundation. And as soon as you made your departure, things began to fall apart. Not only did they have to stare at the wreckage of what they had done to you, but they also had to gaze at the ruins of their own history. This was the first time that they experienced this. The harm that they caused did not begin with you. Maybe it started with a mother who only showed love when it was convenient. Maybe it was a father who left before they even understood what absence meant. Maybe it was growing up in a house where love felt like a battlefield, where survival meant learning how to manipulate, how to control, how to hurt before they could be hurt. No matter what it was, they had buried it all the way down. They persuaded themselves that it didn't matter, that they were fine, and that they had gone on until you forced them to see what they had spent their entire life trying to avoid seeing, due to the fact that you did not only adore them, but also saw them. The anguish that they pretended didn't exist, the fear that was behind their rage, the insecurity that was behind their arrogance, and the dread that was behind their brutality were all visible to you. When you looked underneath the adult who said they were unbreakable, you saw the child who had been broken. Moreover, rather than confronting it, they fled. It was for the purpose of protecting themselves that they injured you. They drove you away before you could see too much. They ruined anything real because they did not know how to exist in something healthy. They convinced themselves for a considerable amount of time that this was the only way they could be. Hey Chosen One, our Wisdom Peak channel for powerful insights, spiritual awakening, and divine wisdom is available in the description. Subscribe now and ascend with us. But your absence made them more vulnerable. Not only were they not powerful, but they were also not untouchable, and they were not beyond the suffering that they had caused to other people. However, they were only damaged. It had been their entire existence that they had been lying that they were not. They swore that they did not require your presence, assured themselves that they were okay, that the loss of you was not a significant issue, and that they would proceed in the same manner as they had always done. On the other hand, they did not, since for them, moving on was not as simple as finding someone fresh to replace them. During this particular instance, they were unable to ignore the void that existed. So, they became obsessed with you. They watched your every move, looking for indications that you still cared, that you still thought about them, and that they still had a chance. This was not because they had changed, nor was it because they were prepared to love you in the way that you deserved, but rather because being alone meant confronting the version of themselves that they had never wanted to see. In addition, that version was quite unattractive. You weren't just a person to them. You were comfort, you were stability, and you were the illusion that they were whole. Without you, they were unstable, uncentered, and unraveling. This is because you were more than just a person to them. Moreover, the truth was intolerable in the absence of you. When they thought about it, they convinced themselves that if they could just get you back, everything would go back to how it had been before. They would feel okay again. They would feel powerful again. And they would feel normal again. A terrible notion persisted in the back of their minds even as they reached for you, even as they rehearsed the apologies, the promises, and the desperate attempts to bring you back in. This thought was that nothing had changed. They were still the same. They had not grown, they had not healed, and they had not put in the effort. They had not changed. In addition, they were well aware that if they were to win you back, they would take advantage of you once more. It was not a question of whether they could win you back. Rather, the question was whether you would allow them to do so. The process of growing is difficult. The process of change is terrible. Yet according to Mandy Hale, nothing is more painful than remaining stuck in a place where you do not belong. And they had been stuck for a very long time, caught in their own toxic patterns, stuck in patterns that they swore weren't their fault, and stuck in a cycle of instructions that had cost them everything, including you. They initially put up a fight against it. They convinced themselves that they did not need to change, that the loss of you was not a wake-up call, but rather just bad luck, and that they could move on, find someone else, and continue doing things the way they had always done them. However, life was not that kind, because each time they attempted to begin over, they fell into the same traps. These traps included the same outbursts, the same manipulation, and the same emotional barriers that they constructed because they were so high that no one could pass through them. And each and every time, it ended in the same manner, with another person leaving, with another reminder that they had not yet outgrown the damage that they had just brought into every new interaction. They began to recognize the pattern. Every failed relationship was a reflection of the one they had lost with you. This was not because you were the best relationship they had ever had. Rather, it was because you were the only person who had ever held up a mirror and forced them to confront themselves. Real change didn't come quickly. It came in pieces, in the nights where loneliness forced them to sit with their thoughts instead of running from them, in the painful realization that every loss, every broken connection, every moment of self-destruction led back to them, in the guilt that grew when they thought about how much you had endured before you finally walked away. For the very first time, they began to put in the effort. It was not because they wanted to win you back or to demonstrate anything to anybody else. Rather, it was because they realized that being the same was killing them. They ultimately came to the realization that if they did not make any changes, they would never be able to break free of the cycle that had destroyed everything that was positive in their life. It was not simple. In fact, nothing about it was simple. But neither losing you nor losing themselves required them to do so. Initially, they made the error of believing that you required their assistance more than they required yours. They were mistaken. You were not just another person in their life. You were the one who saw them, actually saw them. You were the one who believed in them when they didn't believe in themselves. You were the one who attempted to bring them out of the darkness that they swore didn't exist. Yet, they threw it away. Time proved them wrong. They see it now, not in the major moments, but in the small ones. The way you used to check on them, the way your voice softened when they were struggling, and the way you made space for them even when they didn't deserve it. They see it now. It was a rare individual that they had, and they lost you. That feeling of regret does not go away. It follows them around, since they are aware that someone like you does not appear twice. The burden of their errors is intolerable, and the stillness that exists between you is suffocating. They want to have a conversation with you. They convince themselves that they have evolved, that they are different now, and that this time it would be better. They wonder, would you even respond? However, do they merit a second opportunity, due to the fact that your absence taught them something that your presence could never teach them? And if they actually turned their behavior around, they wouldn't have to ask for you back. They would just let you go. You have never been merely another loss. Rather, you have been the earthquake that shattered their illusions, the force that tore away their excuses, and the storm that left them exposed. In order to construct their world, they had made the assumption that you would never leave, and that regardless of how much they took from you, you would continue to give. That was not the case. They would have maintained the same cycles, the same chaos, and the same self-destruction that was masked as love if you had stayed.